Welcome to the S.O.A.P Bible Study Series from Oak Tree Community Church in South Bend, Indiana. We're working our way through the book of Leviticus, and we have come to what has to be the
the best part of the whole book.
the two most
odd chapters. Specific, I was going to say graphic,
maybe not graphic because we've got some other stuff coming.
Okay, we have 59 verses on skin diseases, and then we have 57 verses on how to be purified if you happen to have a skin disease.
So is this like the medical journal of Leviticus?
It seems that way, doesn't it? But so the first thought process is 2 full chapters for this. It's got to be a big deal.
You're talking
right?
this.
I mean, creation took 7 verses, right?
So there are, somewhere between 2 and 3 million people at Mount Sinai in the nation, right? Yeah, not the whole world, just the nation of Israel now at Mount Sinai. They have come out of Egypt. There were the plagues that God did in the book of Exodus, right? There's the hail and the locusts and the blood and all this stuff. We don't know what kind of hygiene they've had because they've been slaves. They, the whole thing.
Right.
They're getting ready to go into a new land that they've never been in. Abraham was there, but these people have never been there before. Right. We know that the land of Canaan was pagan. It was wicked. They've been there, child sacrifices. Who knows what's going on in there? So God is prepping them with the dietary laws last time. And now with some medical things as well.
Exactly.
Prepping them to go into this.
And that's what I was going to say, because last week we covered what was kosher. Okay, here's the things that you as a Jew can eat. And everything else you can't eat.
I'm guessing there was not a lot of lobster in the middle of the desert. But they're going to be by the Mediterranean Sea. Manna tasted like lobster.
Covered with bacon. All right.
It tastes like anything you want it to taste
like.
Well,
so then the big question is, were the priests early doctors?
Yeah.
And it doesn't seem that way.
No.
But they are making a determination, and it's their job to make a determination if a person is clean or unclean.
Ceremonially clean
or
unclean,
right. Not physically dirty, although that was part of it.
But that's really what we're seeing here. And last week I mentioned that they're basically
but a doctor
functioning.
Is healing people or prescribing medicine. And there's no medicine yet.
Well, I mean, there's oil and there's stuff that they are doing. But they're really the judiciary I mentioned last time. They're the judiciary system. They're saying in order to come to God. This is really important. I think I forgot to mention it last time. But chapter 11 is the first mention of the phrase, "You be holy because I am holy," which becomes part of Israel's big thing. We see it a couple of different times in the New Testament as well. God's presence, we talked about this last time, God's presence there with the people. He wants them to have access to him. He wants them to be able to come to him, but they have to come through the priests. Okay, the priests are the representatives between God and the people. They're the judiciary. And so God gave them the law and said, when people come to me, I want them to come to me, but they have to be in a right state, spiritually, physically, health-wise, whatever, before they can come to me. So the priests are going to make this determination. You can't come. You can come. But God was the one who said, here's how you make it. The priests don't get to decide, I don't like you. You can't come. God says, here are the rules.
Right. And there's plenty of rules. You should read them. But it's part of it is, look at the hairs on the sore. If they're whiteies, I don't even remember which was which. But it helps make the determination. But kind of the cool thing is, okay, if someone is now unclean, they can't go home, right? You're, quote, kicked out of camp. Now, you're not kicked out of camp, but you have to go outside of camp at least for a week. So there has to be some provision outside of camp for people to go to.
They've still got to eat. They still have to have shelter. They still have to,
Right, but you don't want them handling your food, right? You don't want them doing things while they're outside, and they need to wash their clothes and all these types of things. And a priest has to say, okay, now is time, because it may be a couple weeks before they're allowed back in. So we see, and I don't know if it's every day, if it's once a week, a priest will go outside of camp, examine a person, and they're either clean or not, right? There's a determination, but you can't come back until the priest says you are clean.
Right. So think about this. Let's say there are 6 people out there.
Right.
Okay. Well, this person came last Tuesday. This person was on Friday. This one was on whatever. Which means there's logs.
Right.
Okay. There's maybe not journals or whatever, but there's logs. There's some kind of notes that says, okay, this is what we're looking for. This is what we're watching for. They didn't have a computer database, but this isn't.
They had to have something.
There is an early medical system. Yeah. And the priest has to remember, nope, you're next Tuesday. You're not, I'm not looking at you yet because it has to be 7 days.
Yeah. So one of the things the priest also checked for was balding, and I feel very picked on right now.
You need a little hat to cover your...
Exactly. But I would not be considered unclean because this is legal baldness back here, what I got going on back here.
That's right.
Although I got some more coming up here.
And that's okay too, but if it's, splotchy, now
I think
you got a problem.
And that's the thing, right? Yeah. If your hair is falling out, there's a sickness in there. We have no idea what it is or what's going to happen.
Right.
But we know you need to go outside of camp for a while.
Well, and I think that's really, it talks about burns, it talks about boils, it talks about all these other things, right? When I was growing up, it was like, there were lepers and this. Okay. Well, leprosy, what we know medicinally today, is a very specific type of disease. This really is covering a lot of different. It's not just leprosy. There's a lot of different things that are included here.
And it would be very common.
Yeah.
So that I think that's why we have 59 verses on how to identify it and then 57 for purification. Because when you are done and you're okay, well, now you have to bathe. Maybe you have to shave too.
Yeah.
To get everything off. Your clothes either need to be burned or washed.
Yep.
And then things you touch during that too. And they're very specific. Okay, if it's something leather, here's what you got to do. If it's a clay pot, nope, you got to break it.
Yeah, because the clay is porous, and if it gets into it, you can't wash it out.
Yep, exactly. So again, there's a lot of logic in here, and it makes sense. And they didn't have medicine. They didn't have a way of knowing what was going on. So there needed to be these general statements that happened.
And they did have some. Let's not forget that they were coming out of Egypt.
Yeah.
And Egypt has, and I know that's not what they don't have medicine. Yeah. But Egypt was well known for its medicinal practices. Right. There's a lot of stuff there.
Poor in today's world.
But they were, poor in today's world, but they were also slaves. How much of that did they get into it? So they are using what today we would call homeopathy type stuff.
And a lot of their medicine, all the medicines were based on flowers and plants
Herbs
of the area.
That's right.
They're a totally different area now. Yeah. So, is this any good?
Yeah, right.
So
you go from Egypt and the Nile River, and now you're in the middle of the desert at Sinai. Yeah. Now we're going to go into Canaan, and what's there, right? Yeah. Yep, you're right.
One other thing that was kind of cool is when they were declared unclean, they had to go outside of camp. They also had to wear a mask or a face covering or a mustache covering. I think they call it there. And they have to tell people, I'm unclean, I'm unclean. Yeah. And they say they need to yell it out. I don't know if they actually had to yell it out, but
if people
you don't want people coming up to you.
Yeah.
Right, I'm unclean, I'm unclean. You have to tell people, which is interesting.
Well, yeah, and we have in our modern world, people wear masks and different things. I don't think they were masked up and gloved and everything like we would see in today's hospitals or whatever. Right. But you got masks, you got isolation or quarantine. The sick people were set aside until they could get well. Everybody else went on with life.
Right.
Their business.
One thing I did want to talk about in chapter 14, there's a purification process.
Yep.
And you can read about it, and there's specific things that have to be in there. But it does involve 2 live birds. And they take birds and one of them dies and becomes part of the process, but the other one is set free.
Yeah.
Why? Or any idea? I mean, is that supposed to represent the living and dying, and the same thing could happen to the person because they could easily die too or
That's
live?
the best thing that I know is that there's got to be some kind of symbolism there that you know, the one it just says you're talking chapter 14. It just says there in verse 7, and send the live bird away over the open countryside. You're free.
Right.
Go. You know.
Right.
So there's definitely some symbolism going on there.
Right. Yeah. Kind of.
Couple of things that I wanted to point out. Number one, it talks about, okay, so if you're sick, you've got to do a sin offering. It's like, wait a minute. I mean, hold on a second. Why do I have to do a sin offering if I'm
every time
sick?
I'm sick,
I've
sinned in some way.
Right, yeah. So we have to remember we have taken the word sin and made it very, very narrow. Okay, this is like, you know, violating God's character. And of course, sin can do that. But the words, both Hebrew and Greek, the words that go along with sin are broader than just violating God's character, right?
Okay.
Let's say breaking the law. The law is you have to be clean. If you're unclean, if you're sick and you've been declared unclean, you're no longer right with the law. So technically, you've sinned, you've trespassed, you've missed the mark, all of these different words. It's not that you've committed some great rebellion against God, but you are no longer right with the law so that you can enter God's presence.
Okay.
So when we talk about sin offerings, we're not talking about all these people are constantly in a rebellion against God all the time. They've broken the law. They're no longer right with the law, so they need to be made right with the law. Yeah. Today we wouldn't use the term sin offering. We would use the term fine.
Yeah.
Okay? You've broken the law. You're not right with the law. You pay the fine. You're right with the law again.
Right.
For them, it's like, gotta wait till sundown and wash your robe. Okay. So let's not get caught up on the whole, sin offering. Why are these people, doing sin offerings? Okay. Just because they got sick. It wasn't their fault, right?
Right.
So that's number one. Number two, you go into the Gospels, and Jesus is healing all these people. One of the things that I really, really love, and I always remind people, Jesus never broke the law. Okay, he loved violating the traditions. I think there's a personal enjoyment of violating their traditions, but he never broke the law. This was God's law. Jesus was perfect, sinless, never even that type of thing. And he never told people to break the law. So when he healed somebody, for instance, and he said, "Don't go home, go see the priest." Why? Because that's what you had to do. Jesus knew they were healed. There was no question they were healed. But the law said you go be examined by the priest first before you go home and spread it around.
All right. Good point.
And so Jesus, even in those cases, he followed the law and he expected the people to follow the law.
Yeah, nice.
And I think that's really, really important.
Cool. Yeah, right.
So
great.
I think that we don't want to spend any more time in skin diseases. So
no, we do not. Because we need to get to next week.
We have to get to the next fun thing next week. Actually, next week, one sort of weird, gross thing, but then we get into some really cool stuff here. So you'll have to wait. Read about skin diseases this week. As always, if you have questions, we'd be happy to answer those for you. Don't gloss this over. We try to keep it a little bit light. This isn't, it's like 2 chapters I don't need to read. God put it in here. 2 Timothy 3 says all scripture is inspired by God, and it is useful. It is helpful for us. We can learn from it. So look for those things that you can learn. And we'll come back next week, and we will do this again next time, okay?